17-year-old Devin Dwayne Myers collapsed on a quiet Shreveport street as Shamichael Antonio Pearson stood over him and pulled the trigger again. Shamichael Antonio Pearson was a teenager from Shreveport. He became the focus of a high-profile legal case after an incident in March of 2022. Reports identify him as the person charged in the shooting of 17-year-old Devin Dwayne Myers. Devin was a basketball player at Huntington High School. Pearson was arrested shortly after police reviewed surveillance video and searched his home for evidence. That night, Devin had gone to a friend's house to borrow a phone charger. The neighborhood was quiet. On the street, Devin and Pearson ran into each other. Testimony at trial said the two had argued sometime earlier. According to prosecutors, the meeting escalated. Witnesses and officers said Pearson pointed a handgun at Devin. Pearson reportedly said words that were quoted in court, "Didn't I tell you that I was going to get you?" He then fired multiple times in Devin's direction. Court evidence showed Pearson fired at least twice while Devin was on the ground. Devin was left lying in the street. Investigators connected Pearson to the gun. They recovered a Glock 9mm from his home, hidden in a freezer. Forensic testing linked the firearm to the incident. DNA testing connected Pearson to the weapon. Surveillance footage and witness accounts helped prosecutors build the timeline. These pieces of evidence, including the video, the gun in the freezer, and the forensic links, formed the core of the state's case. Why did this happen? Court testimony and reporting show the immediate cause was a prior argument between Pearson and Devin. Prosecutors said the shooting was an act of retaliation. Pearson's lawyers challenged parts of the prosecution's case. However, the jury found the evidence strong enough for a conviction of second-degree homicide. The record shows the act was targeted at Devin, not random. The trial began in early March of 2023. Jurors heard testimony about the March 3, 2022 incident, the surveillance video, and forensic connections between Pearson and the gun. The trial ended quickly after closing arguments. The jury reached a unanimous decision in under an hour. On March 9, 2023, jurors found Shamichael Pearson guilty of second-degree homicide. Louisiana law imposes strict penalties for this type of conviction, especially when a firearm is involved. A key legal point is that the conviction was for second-degree rather than first-degree homicide. This distinction reflects how the jury and the law viewed intent and the circumstances. The state prosecuted the case under statutes that allow a mandatory life sentence when certain conditions are met. After the conviction, the case moved to sentencing. On March 27, 2023, Caddo District Judge Chris Victory imposed a mandatory life sentence. Pearson must serve it without probation, parole, or suspension. Devin's family attended the hearing. Pearson's family was also present. The district attorney's office said the sentence was required by law based on the conviction and evidence presented. Pearson's case shows how one argument can end in a life sentence. But what happens when an innocent night out with friends turns into a mobile shooting? Joshua Jamerick Smith grew up in Shreveport. Records show he was a teenager in 2021. Some family members later spoke in court after the verdicts. Court records and local reports focused on how young he was when the shootings happened. Investigators said he was part of a group that traveled together that night. The only widely reported personal details concerned the few family members who attended the courthouse and gave statements during the trial and sentencing. For privacy and accuracy, this account follows what prosecutors and local news documented at trial. The night began at a movie theater. On September 4, 2021, chaos started in the Cinemark Tinseltown parking lot on the southeast side of Shreveport. Reports say a group of teens left the theater after that first incident. Surveillance video and testimony show a gray Kia Optima leaving Tinseltown. That car drove to the intersection of Uri Drive and East Burt Coons Industrial Loop. The Optima pulled into the Circle K parking lot. Seconds later, a white Honda Accord stopped at the intersection. Prosecutors say Joshua Smith exited the Optima carrying a rifle. People in and around the Optima also fired guns into the intersection. In the chaos, 13-year-old Kelvonte Degra sat in the back seat of the Accord. He was struck and later did not survive. Other drivers and passengers were shot at. Some were injured. Investigators recovered about 50 spent shell casings at the scene. They also documented damage to vehicles and to the glass on nearby buildings. Those physical details show how many shots were fired in a short time. The shell casings and broken glass show a sudden burst of gunfire that resulted in one child not surviving and several people being hurt. You may wonder why they drove from the theater to a gas station and fired into an intersection. Prosecutors said the shots were a follow-up to the earlier theater incident. They said the cars were pursuing one another down the Uri Drive corridor. Witnesses and video gave investigators a timeline. Shots at Tinseltown, the Optima leaving, the stop at the Circle K, and then the immediate volley of fire into the intersection. The pattern on the ground, the dozens of casings, and the route the cars took matched what multiple witnesses later described in court. Prosecutors argued the shootings were not random. They said the shots targeted drivers and vehicles tied to the earlier incident. For the jury, motive was linked to that earlier confrontation and to the idea that the Optima's occupants acted together after leaving the theater. Defense lawyers disputed parts of that story. They questioned whether the evidence tied Smith directly to the weapon used in the fatal incident. Still, surveillance video and physical evidence formed the core of the state's case. The state said an armed teenager stepped out of a car, fired a rifle into traffic, and then joined a chase. Police say the chase ended in the Cedar Grove area. Investigators found guns hidden in yards near where the vehicle stopped. They collected shell casings and examined surveillance footage. They matched fingerprints and DNA to the interior of the Optima. Video from the Circle K showed a person wearing the same clothing seen earlier at the theater exit the Optima and fire toward the intersection. Prosecutors pointed to that mix of video, recovered firearms, shell casings, and forensic traces inside the car as a chain linking Smith to the shooting. Defense teams raised doubts about who owned the weapons and whether all recovered items belonged to the defendants. The jury heard testimony from scene investigators and other witnesses that tied those physical pieces together. Was he tried as an adult? Yes. Although Smith was 15 at the time of the shooting, the state tried him as an adult. Court records and news coverage note that prosecutors moved to try him in adult court. That choice raised the stakes. An adult trial exposed him to the possibility of a life sentence. By the time Smith stood trial in late 2023, he was 18. Prosecutors presented more than 25 witnesses and said they had over 200 pieces of evidence. The jury viewed surveillance video, heard forensic testimony, and saw how investigators pieced the scene together. Defense attorneys challenged whether the state proved which person fired which gun. They questioned chain of custody for some items and urged the jury to consider reasonable doubt. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated. Reports say the jury reached a verdict relatively quickly, just under 2 hours of deliberation. The jury found Smith guilty on the major counts. The convictions included second-degree homicide in the fatality of Kelvonte Degre, multiple counts of attempted second-degree homicide for the others who were shot at, and aggravated damage to property for the buildings and cars hit by the gunfire. Those findings reflect the jury's view that Smith stepped out, opened fire, and that his actions had a fatal outcome. In the courtroom, prosecutors highlighted the surveillance video showing Smith leaving the Optima and the forensic links, such as fingerprints and DNA inside the car, along with the large number of spent casings at the site. That combination of witnesses, video, and physical evidence was what jurors heard most often. Defense objections to some evidence did not change the overall picture for jurors. The jury found Jashun Smith guilty. On October 25, 2023, the verdict was returned. At sentencing on November 28, 2023, the judge imposed a mandatory life sentence for the second-degree homicide conviction in the fatality of Kelvonte Degre. For the additional convictions, 8 counts of attempted second-degree homicide and 4 counts of aggravated damage to property, the court gave separate prison terms. The judge ordered 30 years at hard labor for each attempted homicide count, to run concurrently with one another, but consecutive to the life term. The judge ordered 15 years for the property damage counts, concurrent to each other but consecutive to the others. Taken together, the sentence structure means the life term is the controlling punishment, and the other terms are stacked to extend the time before parole eligibility under Louisiana law. Court files and reporting show the case moved quickly from a shocking night of gunfire to a full prosecution. For the family of Kelvonte Degre, there is a loss that no sentence can fix. For Smith, the life sentence means he will spend decades in prison. The next case started as chaos in the streets, but ended with a child struck inside her own home. Ken McHale Dano-Ray was a young man from Shreveport. Local reports and court papers say he was connected to people who law enforcement later described as part of a street gang. Public records list him as living in Shreveport when he was arrested and tried. On the afternoon of May 1, 2022, 13-year-old Landry Faith Anglin was at a relative's home on the 4,500 block of Fairfield Avenue in Shreveport. Nearby streets were chaotic, cars were chasing each other, and shots were fired from vehicles. One bullet went through a wall and hit Landry. She later passed away at a hospital. Neighbors and family were shocked. A child who had been spending a normal afternoon at home did not make it back. Investigators relied on witnesses and surveillance footage. Prosecutors presented video they said showed Ray firing a high-powered rifle while being chased by another vehicle on Erie Street, between Thornhill and Line Avenues. Forensic testing later connected the bullet that hit Landry to the Kel-Tec rifle taken from Ray after he fled. Within days, U.S. Marshals found Ray in Arlington, Texas. He was taken into custody, and the rifle was recovered. Ballistics testing helped investigators connect the bullet to Ray's gun. Experts at the North Louisiana Crime Lab matched markings on the bullet to the barrel of the Kel-Tec rifle. This scientific connection was central to the prosecution's case. Why did Ray fire that day? Law enforcement described the situation as a rolling shootout. Rival gang groups were chasing each other and exchanging gunfire on the streets. Prosecutors said Ray fired to target people in the pursuing vehicle. They did not focus on whether he meant to hit anyone in nearby houses. Instead, the evidence showed reckless actions in a public area while using a high-powered weapon. The stray bullet that hit Landry was the tragic result. Ray's trial began after a grand jury indicted him. Jury selection happened in June 2024. Over a week-long trial, prosecutors called police officers, forensic experts, and other witnesses. They presented video clips, ballistics reports, and testimony, linking Ray to the rifle and the shooting. The defense shared their side of the story. After a short deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Less than an hour after closing arguments, the jury found Ray guilty of second-degree homicide and related firearms charges. At trial, prosecutors emphasized Ray's gang connections, the video showing someone firing the rifle, and the ballistics match. Some reports said the jury reached a decision in 40 minutes, showing how strongly they viewed the evidence. In June 2024, the jury found Kenmichael Dano Ray guilty. Sentencing was on July 16, 2024. District Judge Ramona Emanuel gave a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of pardon or reduction. Landry's parents gave emotional statements, which the court noted. Co-defendants received different outcomes. One pleaded guilty, another got 10 years for a weapons charge, and others were still involved in related proceedings. Ray did not make a clear public statement about his thoughts that day. Court records and news reports do not show a confession or apology. Most of the official record focuses on the evidence and the statements from the victim's family. Landry Anglin was 13 years old. Her obituary says she loved reading, music, and art. She played lacrosse and was proud to be a big sister. Family, friends, and her community felt the loss deeply. The legal outcome held the person found responsible accountable, but it could not bring back a life. The case also sparked local discussions about gun safety and led to more prosecutions and plea deals for others connected to the events of that day. The next victim was only 13. The suspect was just 15. What could drive one neighbor to turn on another? Mark St. Julian was a teenager living in a mobile home park in Lafayette, Louisiana. He and Alyssa Case, who was 13, were neighbors. On May 29, 2002, Alyssa's mother left the trailer park for about 45 minutes. When she returned, she found her daughter unresponsive inside their mobile home. Alyssa had a severe cut to her throat and injuries to her head. Police later arrested St. Julian. They charged him with second-degree homicide. Investigators said the break-in seemed to be a search for money. Police noted there was no clear sign of forced entry. This raised questions about how the intruder got inside and why. St. Julian was 15 when authorities named him a suspect. He initially pleaded not guilty, and the case moved toward trial. Reports and trial details show a clear, though tragic, picture. Alyssa was a 7th grade honor student who mostly stayed close to home. The incident happened during quiet hours and shocked neighbors. Medical reports confirmed a serious cut to the throat and a head injury. These injuries made it clear this was not an accident. The community struggled to understand how such a thing could happen in a place they thought was safe. In court, the state charged St. Julian with second-degree homicide. Prosecutors argued that the incident happened after St. Julian broke into Alyssa's home looking for money. The defense questioned some evidence and St. Julian's involvement. The trial drew attention because of the young ages and the severity of what happened. By June 2003, news outlets reported that a trial would start in September. If convicted, St. Julian faced life in prison. A jury found St. Julian guilty. The court sentenced him to life in prison. Louisiana law does not allow the harshest penalty for actions committed by those under 16. So life in prison was the maximum sentence. The conviction and sentence were later appealed. The Louisiana Third Circuit Court of Appeal reviewed the case and confirmed the original decision. The appeal did not change the life sentence or the verdict. Years later, questions arose about whether a life term for someone who committed an unlawful action as a juvenile could be reduced. This was after new U.S. Supreme Court decisions limited life without parole for minors. Defense lawyers argued these changes might allow a sentence review. The victim's family opposed any early release. These legal developments showed that the case did not fully end on the day of sentencing. Why did St. Julian do it? Police said the entry was to search for money. Beyond that, public reports and court records do not provide a clear motive like revenge or planning. Many cases have gaps in motive. In this case, the evidence suggested a break-in that escalated. The court focused on what happened and who was responsible, not on why it happened psychologically. The appeal examined the evidence and trial process. The higher court reviewed the trial record and found no major errors that would change the outcome. The conviction and life sentence were confirmed. This meant the trial was conducted according to the law, and the jury's decision stood. After his conviction, St. Julian was sent to the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. Records show he joined prison programs and explored religion while inside. Local reports mention his participation in faith-based programs and family visits years into his sentence. These accounts show how life can change inside prison, even after a serious incident. They do not change the fact of the incident or the sentence the court handed down. Next up, a mother and child left fighting to live over something worth almost nothing. Aramis Jackson was a 20-year-old man from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. In September 2010, he broke into a home in a way that would deeply affect one family. The target was Alexandra Engler, a 42-year-old single mother, and her 9-year-old daughter, Ariana. Jackson was drawn to their home because of a plasma TV, which he wanted to take. That night, the situation escalated. Jackson shot Engler in a deliberate manner. Ariana was shot multiple times, 6 times according to police records. Despite her injuries, Ariana managed to crawl away. She pretended to be unresponsive and used a cell phone to call for help. When emergency responders arrived, they found her hurt but alive in the back of the house. Why did Jackson do this? Was it desperation for material gain? Or a moment of reckless decision-making? Reports do not give a clear motive beyond wanting to take the TV, but it raises a troubling question. How can a simple theft escalate into such a harmful event? Looking at Jackson's past shows a concerning pattern. In 2009, he was arrested at LSU for having a firearm in a gun-free zone. The charge was eventually dropped. The judge gave him a chance to make amends by performing 3 random acts of kindness. Jackson completed the acts, and the case was dismissed. In April 2010, Jackson was arrested again, this time for carrying a firearm and illegal substances. He made a plea deal, pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, and served just over 3 months. He was released in July of the same year. A few months later, he carried out the home invasion. A few days after the incident, law enforcement found Jackson in a home in Violet, near Baton Rouge. He was staying there with a woman he had met online. She did not know about what he had done. DNA from the incident scene linked him directly to the incident, which led to his arrest. Prosecutors originally considered the most serious sentence. After several years of legal proceedings, Jackson accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to first-degree harm for Engler's passing and attempted first-degree harm for Ariana's injuries. In February 2017, District Judge Tony Marabella sentenced him to life in prison for the first charge. He also received 50 years of hard labor for the second charge, to be served at the same time. He will not be eligible for release. The plea offered relief to the family, especially Ariana's grandmother, Bonnie Hunt. She had asked for Jackson's life to be spared to avoid causing Ariana more emotional pain through a long trial. Hunt said, "My pain, my grieving, my rage, it's there," but also added, "Justice has been served." Ariana, though living with limitations from her injuries, has undergone 6 surgeries and continues to recover. Next up, a teenager, a stolen Jeep, and a gun that turned a joyride into a life sentence. If you find stories like these important, consider subscribing. Anthony Johnson was just 17 when events happened that would shape the rest of his life. On December 11th, 2005, on a cold afternoon near Baton Rouge, Anthony and 2 others were riding with 22-year-old Daniel McGee in McGee's Jeep Cherokee along River Road. Anthony was sitting in the front passenger seat. At some point, Daniel stopped the vehicle in the middle of the road. What happened next involved a chain of choices that cannot be traced to a single moment, but the effects were serious. Anthony got out of the vehicle and pulled McGee from the driver's seat, pushing him onto the roadside. He then climbed in and drove off, passing co-workers in another car who were shocked by what they saw. McGee, struggling on the pavement, had been hit twice by gunfire and later passed away from his injuries. Was it an accident or something more serious? Johnson claimed it was an accident. He said a gun, a .380 high-point semi-automatic, was handed to him by the man in the back seat, Robert Edwards. Anthony told officers that Edwards said the safety was off. When Edwards tried to grab the gun back from Anthony, the trigger was squeezed, and the gun discharged 3 times. Johnson said McGee was hit by accident. Investigators matched the shell casings found in the Jeep, and the bullets recovered from McGee's body to the gun, later found in a garbage can near Anthony's vacant home. At trial, prosecutors argued the case as second-degree homicide under Louisiana law. The jury examined all the details carefully. They had to decide whether it was reckless behavior or something more serious. In the end, the jury found Anthony guilty as charged. He was sentenced to life in prison with hard labor. He would not have the chance for parole, probation, or suspension of his sentence. Years later, the case gained new attention after the Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama in 2012. The decision said mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles were unconstitutional. This allowed for the possibility of resentencing in cases like Johnson's. In March 2017, a Louisiana trial court held a hearing to see if Anthony's youth and his time in prison should lead to a reduced sentence. Despite being young at the time of the incident and having served 10 years, the court found little reason to change his sentence. Angola prison officials testified about his behavior in prison, including 39 disciplinary incidents involving fights with staff, smuggling, and inappropriate conduct with a female guard. The judge had to answer the difficult question: has time changed him? The answer was no. Johnson, described by officials as extremely dangerous, had not shown rehabilitation. The court reimposed the same life sentence without parole. Judge Richard Anderson summarized the decision clearly. It appears defendant is okay not only with harming a human being, but also with blaming someone else, he added. He was ungovernable then, and is still ungovernable. Why did the next 19-year-old broadcast himself online while on a crime spree? Tyrese Harris was a young man from New Orleans. His name became known because of a series of very serious offenses in early 2022. In late January and early February 2022, Harris carried out several aggressive carjackings across New Orleans. The first incident happened at a Circle K on Howard Avenue. On January 18, 2022, a man was pumping gas when Harris jumped into his vehicle. The owner drew a gun, and Harris ran away while firing shots at the car. Police later found a cell phone and shell casings at the scene. These items directly linked Harris to the incident. A few weeks later, on February 1st, Harris struck again at a Costco gas pump. He targeted a realtor named Kelly Rhine. While she was pumping gas, Harris forcibly took her vehicle. She was dragged between 30 and 50 feet. She suffered fractures to her skull, face, and neck, along with injuries in her brain. Investigators connected Harris to both incidents. Evidence included surveillance footage, text messages, vehicle descriptions, and an Instagram live feed showing him wearing the same clothes as in the carjackings. Why Harris acted this way is unclear. Was it desperation, a need for control, or something deeper? His motives remain unknown. He did not explain why he acted in court, only admitted that he did. During the carjacking investigation, police were also looking into the passing of 12-year-old Derek Cash. On January 3, 2022, Cash was found with gunshot injuries in New Orleans East. Later, investigators traced this event to Harris. In a recorded interview, he admitted to shooting Cash with a .45 caliber firearm. This charge was included in his case because, while the carjackings were federal offenses, the shooting of the child was handled by the state. It added serious legal consequences. Prosecutors charged Harris with second-degree manslaughter in this case. A conviction carried a mandatory life sentence. In February 2023, Harris, then 19, pleaded guilty to 5 federal charges. These included conspiracy, carjacking, and weapons violations. One of the charges involved the Costco incident. The plea carried the possibility of a life sentence for using a firearm during a carjacking. By June 2023, a judge sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison. 20 of those years were specifically for the Costco carjacking that left the realtor seriously injured. In July 2023, Harris pleaded guilty to manslaughter and conspiracy to commit second-degree manslaughter for the shooting of Derek Cash. The court gave him 40 years for manslaughter and 30 years for the conspiracy. These sentences would run at the same time, effectively making the total state sentence 40 years. Harris's attorney said, "My client accepts responsibility for his actions, which at this point is all he can do, and he will serve his time." Analysts expect his federal and state sentences to overlap. He will start in federal custody before transferring to state prison to serve the rest of his sentence. Ladarius Coleman was a teenager growing up in Louisiana. The event he was involved in on Memorial Day, 2021, brought him into the spotlight and left a lasting mark on his name. On the evening of Memorial Day, just before 8 p.m., several people were gathered at the gated pool area of Fairway View Apartments in Baton Rouge. Families came together to remember loved ones and enjoy the evening. At that moment, Coleman entered the area. He approached two young men sitting near the pool. A brief struggle broke the calm of the gathering. Then, shots rang out. Officials say Coleman may have been aiming at one of the seated young men, but the situation quickly turned chaotic. 17-year-old Dwayne Dunn Jr., age 16, and Reginald Thomas Jr., age 20, were hit and did not survive the scene. A toddler, 1-year-old Jatiri Brown, was playing nearby. She was not connected to the others but was struck by a stray bullet. She later passed away at a hospital. 3 lives were lost in an instant on a day meant for remembrance. Many wondered if Coleman meant to harm any child at all, or if he was focused only on his target. That moment of misjudgment changed everything for him and for the victims. As Coleman grew older, the legal process moved forward. Now legally an adult, he faced charges for the triple loss of life. Prosecutors described the struggle, the exchange of shots, and the tragic outcome. Public records do not reveal a clear reason for his actions beyond the possibility that one of the young men may have been his intended target. The effect, however, was widespread and devastating. In December 2024, a judge sentenced Coleman to life in prison. Louisiana law allowed him to be eligible for parole after 25 years because he was 15 at the time of the incident. This means he could potentially have a review around age 40. The families were left to process their grief. Dwayne Dunn Jr.'s mother said no sentence could bring him back, but multiple life sentences were necessary. Jatiri's grandmother called the sentence a way to get some type of healing, though she said her heart would never fully recover. Did Coleman show any remorse in court? Public records do not indicate that he accepted responsibility. Prosecutors noted that he did not, which added to the family's pain. The law, however, followed its course. Life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The courtroom recorded the verdict, but there were no statements or final words from Coleman. Silence and grief remained. Up next is a teenager, 2 older companions, and an act that changed everything. Clifton Gibson was born in 1979 in New Orleans. Court files and news reports show he grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of unlawful acts and few steady support. At 17, Gibson took part in a theft with 2 older companions. Their target was a 25-year-old man. Court documents say the situation turned chaotic when the man tried to resist. During the struggle, Gibson fired a weapon, and the man passed away. Prosecutors treated the act as first-degree homicide with special circumstances. These circumstances included theft and use of a firearm. That made the legal case more serious. Investigators collected evidence and made arrests quickly. Gibson was charged with first-degree homicide, using a firearm, and theft. Because of the seriousness of the case, state officials tried him as an adult. At the time, Louisiana law allowed some juvenile cases to move to adult court for serious offenses. This decision affected every step of Gibson's case, from courtroom strategy to potential punishment. The prosecution argued that the theft was planned and turned fatal. They highlighted the theft motive, the presence of a firearm, and the fatal outcome. Witnesses and physical evidence were central to their case. The defense noted Gibson's young age and asked the court to consider it in sentencing. They said he had potential to change and should not face the harshest punishment. The judge and jury sided with the prosecution's account. In 1996, the court sentenced Gibson to life without parole for the first-degree homicide conviction. On top of that, the court added a consecutive term of 12 years and 4 months for the theft and firearm use charges. This combination made it highly unlikely that he would ever leave prison. The sentence drew attention beyond the courtroom. Across the country, lawyers, judges, and lawmakers debated whether teenagers should face life without parole. Critics said teenagers are still developing, and long mandatory sentences do not consider differences between juvenile and adult thinking. Supporters said some acts are serious enough that public safety requires strict punishment. In the years after Gibson's sentence, a series of Supreme Court decisions changed the rules for juvenile punishment. In 2005, the court barred the harshest penalty for actions committed under 18. Later decisions limited life without parole for juveniles, especially when sentences were mandatory, and left no room for judges to consider youth or circumstances. These rulings allowed many juveniles to seek resentencing or parole hearings. They also opened paths for people who received life terms as minors to request a second review. Larry McClinton was just 17 years old when he committed a serious act in Pineville, Louisiana, in April of 1991. Very little is publicly known about his personal life or family. What we do know is shocking. In April of 1991, McClinton went into the mobile home of Angela Hargans on Genie Street in Pineville. Angela was 21 years old and at home with her mother. Suddenly, McClinton opened fire. Angela passed as a result of the incident. Her mother, Nedra Hargans, who was 52, was seriously injured. That behavior was sudden and left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Public reports do not clearly explain why this happened. It is unclear whether the act was random or if McClinton had a reason for choosing this home. We do not know what motivated him: anger, jealousy, or thrill. It also remains unknown whether he knew the victims personally. After his arrest, McClinton faced trial. He was convicted of first-degree homicide. In August of 1992, the court sentenced him to life in prison. At the time, he was only 17. The judge gave the maximum sentence, meaning he would spend the rest of his life in prison with almost no chance of release. In 2016, a Supreme Court decision called Montgomery v. Louisiana changed how juveniles sentenced to life were treated. The ruling said that young offenders must be given a real chance to apply for parole. This decision allowed McClinton and others to seek parole. In October of 2019, McClinton, now 45, appeared before the Louisiana Board of Pardons and Parole. He tried to gain a chance at early release. The request was denied. The district attorney, Philip Terrell, spoke against it on behalf of the family. The loss of Angela and the seriousness of the act were major factors in the decision. The next college freshman stepped out of his car, only to be forced back inside at gunpoint. Dale Dwayne Craig grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a city known for its lively culture and schools. He was raised in a working-class family. His early life had the usual challenges of growing up. His parents were not rich, but they provided a stable home. As a teenager, Craig started spending time with people who influenced him in the wrong direction. This led him to get involved in serious criminal activity. On the night of September 14, 1992, Craig was with three others: Zebby Berthelot, James Conrad, Levine, and Roy Maurer. They targeted Kip Louisiana Earl Gullett, an 18-year-old freshman at Louisiana State University. The group had been driving around the LSU campus parking lots looking for a car to take. Gullett had just returned to his dorm after visiting a friend. When Gullett got out of his Ford Bronco, Craig approached him and hit him in the face with a pistol. The group then forced Gullett into his own car. Craig held a gun to his head while they drove around Baton Rouge. During the ride, Gullett begged for his safety. He offered money and said his parents were wealthy and could pay for his release. Despite this, the group continued with their plan. They eventually stopped in a quiet, isolated area. Craig shot Gullett in the head, ending his life instantly. The group then left and drove away. This act was driven by a desire to steal the car and showed a lack of concern for another person's life. The investigation moved quickly. Witnesses gave descriptions of the suspects in the vehicle. Within days, police caught Craig and the others. At first, Craig denied his involvement. Later, he admitted what happened and identified his accomplices. At his trial, Craig was charged with first-degree homicide. His lawyers argued that he was a minor and should not face the same rules as adults. The prosecutors, however, highlighted that the act was planned in advance. They showed that Craig played an active role in the abduction and the shooting. The jury found Craig guilty. The judge originally sentenced him to the maximum punishment, citing the seriousness of the act and the need to prevent similar incidents. In 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that people under 18 at the time of their actions could not receive the maximum punishment. Craig's sentence was reviewed. In 2006, an appeals court decided not to reduce his life sentence. The court said that while Craig was young, the severity of the act still justified a life sentence. Craig is serving his life sentence at Louisiana State Penitentiary. He has expressed regret for what he did. He participates in programs aimed at rehabilitation. However, the impact of his actions continues to define his life. Thomas Stephen Sanders was born in 1992 in Las Vegas, Nevada. In the summer of 2010, Sanders met 31-year-old Sue Ellen Roberts. She rented a storage unit at a warehouse in Las Vegas where Sanders worked. They started a relationship. About 2 months later, Roberts agreed to take a trip with Sanders over Labor Day weekend. They went to a wildlife park near the Grand Canyon. Roberts brought her 12-year-old daughter Lexus along for the trip. On the way back to Nevada, Sanders stopped on Interstate 40 in a remote area of the Arizona desert. There, he seriously harmed Sue and Roberts. He then forced Lexus into his car and kept her with him. Sanders later took Lexus to Louisiana, where he also caused her passing. Her remains were found by hunters more than a month later. After Lexus was found, authorities started an investigation. This led them to Sanders. He was arrested and admitted to his actions. Investigators also found DNA evidence connecting him to both incidents. He was formally charged with taking a child away, resulting in his passing, and using a firearm during an aggressive act resulting in passing. In September 2014, a federal jury in Alexandria, Louisiana, found Sanders guilty on both charges. The trial lasted 4 years. 18 witnesses gave testimony. The jury discussed the case for about 7 hours before giving their decision. This was the first time the capital sentence was imposed in federal court in the Western District of Louisiana. In December 2024, President Joe Biden reduced the sentences of 37 federal inmates, including Sanders. His penalty was changed to life imprisonment without any chance of release. In April 2025, a grand jury in Catahoula Parish, Louisiana, formally charged Sanders with first-degree homicide of Lexus Roberts. District Attorney Brad Burgett said they planned to pursue the capital sentence at the state level, reopening the possibility of the most severe penalty.